Dr. DeGregory has presented to audiences at TEDx, South by Southwest EDU, the Southern Festival of Books, the Nashville Public Library, Andrew Jackson's Hermitage, Ford, Nissan North America, and National Institutes of Health, to name a few. She has also given talks and served on panels for Alcorn State, Edward Waters, Fisk, Florida Memorial, Harvard, Howard, Tennessee State, Vanderbilt, and Wilberforce universities. A finalist for the HBCU Awards Alumna of the Year recognition, Dr. DeGregory was the recipient of the Fisk University Women of Prominence Award and was recognized as the Hope Dealer of the Year by the Hope Scholarship Initiative of Washington, D.C. A proud native of the Bahamas and a Phi Beta Kappa alumna of the historic Fisk University, she also earned Master of Arts and Doctor of Philosophy degrees in history from Vanderbilt University and a Master of Education from Tennessee State University. Among her professional and civic affiliations is trusteeship of the Tennessee Historical Society and membership with Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Most recently, she was inducted into the Martin Luther King Jr. Collegium of Scholars at Morehouse College and authored her first book, Magic and Mortal, an introduction to her poetic voice. After the musical selection, please stand and receive Dr. Crystal A. DeGregory. Thank you.
Professor Cooper, you tried to get me. I'm not going to let you. Another round of applause for them, please. I bring you greetings from Daytona Beach, Florida, where one woman with $1.50 and 6 students, including her son Albert in 1904, also made a choice to change the world. That woman, Mary McLeod Bethune, that institution, Bethune-Cookman University, where I have the pleasure of serving as the founding director of the Mary McLeod Bethune Center for the Study of Women and Girls, and as an associate professor of history. I thank you sincerely for this very warm welcome home on this very warm day. A welcome home where since December of 1865, we have come. First in tens, then hundreds, then thousands, and now tens of thousands. I come as they came, Mr. Provost, despite being pelted by rocks and assailed with racist diatribes. They came, working during the day for lessons at night. From age 7 to 70, they came in snow in winter, others barefoot in the sun-scorched summer. They came, as did so many others, at would-be black colleges, where at some time in the more than 1 3/4 centuries that we have been in the business of education, loved us into being. Someone's mother's mother's mothers, and someone's father's father's father, someone whose names we will likely never know, someone by picking 200 pounds of cotton a day, back bent and bloody browed, someone through the hiring of themselves out, someone through the taking in of borders and the laundering of clothes, someone through industry and through innovation, someone through invention and entrepreneurship, by the passing of the proverbial hat and the selling of sweet pies and multi-layered cakes, someone, though buked and scorned, sought to learn how to read and how to write, by the starlight, moonlight, and the light of candles and oil lamps. Someone set for themselves the goal of spelling their name. I came more than 100 years after those first days, in the year 1999, the year that the prophet Juvenile proclaimed that Cash Money Records was taken over for the 99 and 2000s. It was the year that The Sopranos made its debut on HBO, Family Guy on Fox, SpongeBob SquarePants, yes, debuted, children, on Nickelodeon. Beyonce Just Knowles was merely the lead singer of that group. It's you. Young people don't know. It's Destiny's Child. Teenage girls and 20-somethings too wore electric blue eyeshadow, halter tops, and plastic chokers. I hear those are back. Boy bands from Boys to Men and to NSYNC wore all white, while rappers sported bucket hats. I hear those are back too. In sports, it was the year of His Air Highness, Michael Jeffrey Jordan. You know, the GOAT, for those of you LeBron fans. Serena had won her very first Grand Slam title at the US Open. Among the top 100 hot singles of the year, now, come on, some of y'all gotta help me, was TLC's No, I Don't Want No. You gotta sing now. There you go, don't give them the whole thing now. They can't take it, they can't take it. Monica's Angel of Mine. And then you have Whitney Houston, Faith Evans, and Kelly Price, who told us everything we already knew about This Is the Heartbreak Hotel. I'm telling you, if you ain't never been there, don't check in, may not check out. The average price of a gallon of gasoline was $1.22 in the United States. But it was undoubtedly higher in the Bahamas. There on the island of Grand Bahama, in the city of Freeport, in the moderate heat of a Caribbean spring, I was a 16-year-old high school senior. I wanted to attend college, but how I would get there, I literally had no clue. A visit from Anthony Jones, class of 1995, the then admissions director of Fisk University, to my high school seemed promising. He met with the entire 12th grade, about 70 or so of us, and asked about what our college plans were. Now, several of my classmates, when called upon, offered colleges of all kinds. Baylor, our head girl said, or maybe she said Tulane. Someone else answered Florida A&M. Now, not to be left out, I raised my hand to be called upon, and he said, "You, where are you going?" "Nail school," I belted back out to him. Now, I want you to know that doing nails is a noble, challenging perfection. Anybody during COVID who didn't know that learned how just very important nail techs were. But I really didn't have any plans to go to nail school. I just wanted to say something. The admissions director, AJ for short, was not about to be undone. He was not about to be outdone. He said, "And what is your name?" "Crystal DeGregory," I answered. He said, "Well, Crystal DeGregory, you're not going to nail school. You're coming to Fisk University." After a series of small miracles, I arrived at Fisk, the only college to which I applied, late after freshman orientation in the September of 1999. AJ had found for me a partial scholarship and promised my mother that Fisk was a place where I would succeed, and that if I did not, he would personally put me on the plane back home at Christmas and she could keep me. He did not, and she did not. And the rest, they say, is history. It is a history owed in no small measure to my undergraduate history professors, Mrs. Linda T. Wynn, Dr. James Craren, and the late Dr. Revis Lee Mitchell, class of 1969, whom I would be remiss to not especially thank for their small but mighty curation of a generation of history majors and history PhDs who today join the ranks of the honoree and his symbolic successor, preeminent Black historian of the 20th century, Dr. John Hope Franklin, class of 1935. In fact, I see some faculty, staff, and alumni present during my 4 sometimes notorious years as a Fisk student. And I'd like to thank these fine folks, who I will not make to stand, who are the flowers of a Fisk education. What a fine garden they make of what the prophet Khalil Gibran, in his signature book of poetry, The Prophet, describes as love. Love is both a watering and a pruning. It is because of them that I and so many more are. And so I hasten those of you a little younger than us. Don't ever think for a moment that you can grow so tall that you will outgrow the need for strong roots. It is with them and so many more in my cloud of witnesses who I do not want to envision for fear that tears would blind me. Beth Madison House, Leslie Morgan Collins, Marcellus Brooks, Paul Kwame, all beloved Fisk alumni. It is with them in mind that I'd like to speak to you from the text. All the flowers. All the flowers. Let me begin by saying that the inspiration for today's address comes from 2 seemingly disparate places. The first comes from the song by the same name, written by American folk singer and social activist Pete Seeger. Its popular refrain was introduced to me in a convoluted way, kind of like Eddie Levert once sang about that song, Brandy, once the OJs did it. So please forgive me for being a little shy of today's year old when I realized that the Bahamian Swain and Citations, All the Flowers, was actually just a spin of Seeger's original, for which there are countless others, all of which are unsurprisingly similar, but almost none of which are exactly the same. They do, however, share Seeger's first stanza. Where have all the flowers gone? Long time passing. Where have all the flowers gone? Long time ago. Where have all the flowers gone? The girls have picked them, everyone. Oh, When will you ever learn? When will you ever learn? Penned as an anti-war song protesting the Vietnam War, Seeger's version of the song follows the life of flowers from being picked by carefree young girls who grew into women fated to place flowers on the graves of their soldier husbands. The flowers, symbolic of life and love, due to the bad choices of powerful, short-sighted men, were literally destined to die in graveyards. Much like his best-known song, We Shall Overcome, the refrain he learned at the Highlander Folk School, which was soon after made famous by agents of the modern civil rights movement, Seeger's "Where Have All the Flowers Gone?" captured the spirit of the anti-war struggle. Now, I'm not going to invoke Seeger's phrasing as mere lamentation today. Instead, I'm going to ask you to turn your attention with me to the song's repeated call, All the Flowers. Still, the specific inspiration for the framing of today's talk comes more concretely from historian Robin D.G. Kelly's masterful December 2022 essay for the Boston Review, titled Flowers for Farah. Kelly's treatment of Columbia University professor of English and Comparative Literature and African American Studies, Farah Jasmine Griffin, is a treasured treatise of his dear friend's scholarship, mentoring, and activism. To quote from Kelly, Griffin brought a praxis of radical love to an academy that doesn't love us back. It is from this framework, the praxis of radical love, that I hope to contribute something of enduring value to the commemoration of the life of Fisk's greatest son, and unquestionably one of the greatest, if not the greatest, intellectuals produced by this American nation, Dr. William Edward Burghardt Du Bois, now W.E.B. for short. Now, while William and Edward were given names, and Burghardt was a name that he had given to himself while in college, I want to be clear in acknowledging that no one of his time dared call him anything less than Dr. Du Bois. But born February 23rd, 1868 in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, just 3 years after the end of the Civil War and 2 years after the dedication of the Fisk Free Colored School, Willie Du Bois, as he was called with great affection then, was precipitously American by circumstance and decidedly black by his own choosing. Had he been born in another time and place like his father and his father's father, his story would have likely been very different. Now, this gets a little dicey, but little that is praiseworthy is known of Du Bois's Haitian-born, New England-raised father, Alfred Du Bois, whose adolescence historians know very little of. But what we do know is that he was married to as many as 3 women at one time, including Du Bois's mother, Mary Sylvania Burghardt. Now, Albert's father's father, Alexander Du Bois, he had been born to a white physician, landholder, and slave owner, Dr. James Du Bois of New York. In what now seems like a symbolic or symbiotic twist of fate for today's talk, Alexander Du Bois's grandfather was one of at least 4 children born to an enslaved woman on the tiny Bahamian island of Long Key. Any Bahamians in here? We'll clap for that. Go ahead and clap for that. Boasting only 8 square miles long was a generous descriptor for the modest 19th century post in the sponge and salt industries. History, it seems, is faded, as it is so often in the telling of stories. This particular story of Du Bois's paternal past is an odyssey that connects the beloved song of my Bahamian girlhood to Du Bois's Bahamian roots, vis-a-vis his Bahamian-born grandfather and his grandfather's mother, Du Bois's enslaved Bahamian great-grandmother. But a Bahamian boyhood was short-lived for Du Bois's grandfather, Alexander, who was moved to Connecticut, where his white father afforded him a formal classical education unavailable to him on that small island that in the year 2010 laid claim to a large population of 29. So the unexpected death of Alexander's white father, physician, and patron left him, on the one hand, destitute, but on the other, determined to self-identify as black. It was that choice, coincidentally, that doomed the short-lived marriage of the wayward barber, Alfred, and the smitten domestic, Mary, already in her mid-30s, the latter of whose family supposedly disapproved of the match on the basis of Alfred's lineage. But whatever the reason, Alfred was gone by the time Willie was but a toddler. Forced into poverty and having descended into depression, Mary retreated with the less than 2-year-old Willie and her older son, who had been born prior to her marriage and was just 5 years Willie's senior. Retreated with them to the Burghardt family's farm in Egerment Plain, where her then newly freed forebears had settled just after the American Revolution. But within a handful of years there, Mary's father, Othello, died of gangrene. Her widowed mother was forced to sell the family homestead. Mary and her 2 sons were left homeless once again. Now, some of you may not know anything about having your back up against a wall, or your lives being a testimony to when it rains, it pours. Ha! But Mary did. Forced to choose between giving up and going on, Mary began again. She packed up her young sons and, along with her mother and possibly a cousin, rented a soot-covered house by the railroad tracks of Great Barrington. And it was there that Mary, about the same age as I am right now, suffered and survived a stroke that left her left arm, leg, or both paralyzed. I know this is not Women's History Month, and I know some of you came here for an esoteric offering of intellectual exercise. But this is a chapel, and as most of us have been black churched, I hope you think it not robbery, Dean Curry, for us to focus in on a mother's love. This mother's love. If you would, you could see middle-aged Mary, having cleaned up white people's homes all her life, survivor of the scorn of an out-of-wedlock pregnancy, a single mother of two struggling with two small sons, the first of whose father is still unknown to history, and the second whose father was somewhere blowing in the wind. If you could just picture her, fatherless, husbandless, and without a family homestead to which she could return, tethered by paralysis to a small, modest bed in a rented room, looking up into the concerned faces of her softly crying children, you would know why today's talk is about a mother's love. It is a love that made her raise up and out of that bed, though partly crippled for the remainder of her life, day in and day out, to work as much as she could, and likely more than she should. It is a love that made her take in boarders to help pay the rent. It is a love that even with Mary's fierce determination, even with her preteen son working to help support his family, and even with the charitable aid of family and friends, left Mary and her family teetering constantly between the margins of poverty and complete destitution. And yet and still, Du Bois could only marvel as a grown man. Yet I was not hungry or in lack of suitable clothes or made to feel unfortunate. Mother, he said, was a dark, shining bronze with smooth skin and lovely eyes. There was a ripple in her black hair, and she had a heavy, kind face. She gave one the impression of infinite patience, but a curious determination was concealed in her softness. I have come here today to tell you that it was Mary's determination. It was Mary's love that lifted her sons up from what the psalmist David 3,000 years ago dubbed the Mary clay. It was Mary who only a few years later was forced to part with her eldest son for fear that he would lose his life as a consequence of a so-called pistol prank at the banks of a great Barrington River gone wrong. And it was Mary, despite everything and everyone, who insisted that her youngest son, Willie, pursued his education with everything they both had. And so, for the life of me, I do not know why history insists on enumerating all of the qualities of Great Barrington and New England, while only begrudgingly mentioning the strength, the determination, and the love of this monumental woman. Yes, Great Barrington, Massachusetts, when compared to the rabid racism of white supremacy in the Deep South, was comparatively racially and educationally progressive. But as Du Bois' biographer, lionized historian, and Fisk University alumnus David Levering Lewis, class of 1956, who was twice winner of the Pulitzer Prize for biography or autobiography for parts 1 and 2 of his biography of W.E.B. Du Bois, pointed out, yes, Great Barrington's black and white populations coexisted civilly, even affectionately, but the two seldom commingled. The fact that the future Du Bois grew up believing that the world was a place where virtually everyone was of the middle class and worked for a living was less endearing, less invaluable, than the lifelong lessons of his mother. The first of the importance of Christian values, and the second, that education would be his salvation. If others of my family, of my colored kin, his mother with her signature gentle quietude asserted, had stayed in school instead of quitting early for small jobs, they could have risen to equal whites. As education was the first and critical step in the climbing of the economic and social ladder, nothing seemed to give Mary as much pleasure as seeing her son Willie excel academically. And in his effort to please her, education would redeem his mother and offer the American nation scholarship so prodigious that it still offers as much insightful instruction to freedom fighters as it does prodding provocation to the soured seed and soil of white supremacy that has abounded in this nation and beyond it for 400 years. Maybe Mary knew it, instinctively, like Jochebed when placing Moses in a blanket on the Nile River. Or maybe Mary, like that other Mary, when she laid Jesus more than 2,000 years ago in a Bethlehem manger. Certainly, she got a glimpse of it. On June 27th, 1884, when William Du Bois was one of 7 boys and 6 girls to graduate from Great Barrington High School. The school's first ever black high school graduate to earn a high school diploma, Willie received several standing ovations for his impassioned address commemorating the recently deceased anti-slavery titan, Wendell Phillips. His mother, Du Bois recalled, beamed with pride. It was a look he not only never forgot, it was a look he likely never saw again. Mary's health was increasingly worsening, and the 16-year-old newly minted high school graduate, despite his academic promise and burning desire to attend the then Harvard College, felt pressured to stay home and work to support his ailing mother instead of going right off to college. But like Moses, Mary was not fated to live long enough to see her son reach the promised land of college, when less than a year later, in March 1885, she died of a stroke, leaving teenage Willie a penniless orphan. Even so, the immeasurable impact of Mary's influence on the burgeoning Du Bois's life lies in plain view in the essay, The Damnation of Women. Rightly described by David Levering Lewis as a midlife essay of great emotion and feminist conviction, in it, Dr. Du Bois later reflected on the many sacrifices his mother and others like her made, extolling and maybe lamenting. They existed not for themselves. In a very real sense, the literal place of Du Bois's mother would, fortunately for him, be succeeded by a metaphorical one: Fisk University. Like so many of us, 17-year-old Du Bois, donning his best clothes and packing up all of his best possessions, arrived at Fisk in September of 1885 after a series of small miracles. The first was securing an annual scholarship of $25 from his mother's congregational church and 3 other churches who pledged the same annually. The second miracle, well, that was his rejection from Harvard. See, I don't know about you, Dean Curry, but I serve a God who has proven that some of the deepest, most painful, most inextricable rejections were actually God's protection. For it was here at Fisk that he not only got the benefit of being declared a sophomore because of his rigorous New England education, but it was here at Fisk for the very first time that Willie Du Bois belonged to a large, vibrant community of black people. Yes, in that 1886 letter, he did write back home enthusiastically to let them people know there was some colored folk up here on this hill. I can hardly realize they are my people, that this great assembly of youth and intelligence are representatives of a race which 20 years ago was in bondage. Described as the first of several turning points in his life, it was at Fisk that he was suddenly thrust into, quote, the world gorgeous color gamut of the American Negro world. Yes, Du Bois said that at his very first day on the campus, it was something like a religious experience. As memorialized in bronze statuette on the library's, I think, 3rd floor, maybe 2nd, I ain't been up there in a while. He wandered exhilarated across the campus, sampling the colors bronze, mahogany, coffee, gold. Du Bois was fascinated by the beauty of black skin and astonished by the inability of white folk to perceive that beauty. Within a month of his arrival, Du Bois found support and campus notoriety. After falling ill with typhoid fever that October, he regularly attended chapel in Old Livingstone, only to discover that he had questions about his faith. And from other students, he received answers to questions that he didn't even know that he had about slavery. It was because of Fisk that he spent those summers in rural one-room schools, where he taught the rudimentary basics of a formal education and learned as much of the humility as he ever would. He learned also some small measure of patience. It was because of Fisk that he joined the staff of the Fisk Herald, making friends with that would-be Mrs. Booker T. Washington one day. And it was at Fisk where first, by virtue of his student Josie's mother, he discovered, he explored, and he mastered to great degree his attraction to the opposite sex, if you know what I mean, okay? By the time Willie Du Bois graduated in June of 1888, he was well on his way to becoming W.E.B. His years at Fisk had earned him admission to Harvard College, which did not accept his course credits, much less recognize his degree from Fisk. As historian Lewis Henry Gates Skip, director of the W.E.B. Du Bois Institute for African and African American Research at Harvard, pointedly notes, while Harvard was his fantasy place to study, Du Bois could not even live in the dorms. Du Bois must have recognized quickly that which we should now universally know to be true. Neither racism nor segregation were Southern inventions, much less the exclusive purview of white Southerners. He who, quote, went to Harvard as a Negro not simply by birth, but recognizing himself as a member of a segregated caste, remarked of his matriculation at Harvard, "I did not find better teachers at Harvard, but teachers better known." And of his Harvard PhD graduation in 895, said this: "The honor, I assure you, was Harvard's." Y'all clap for that. I'm rounding the bend. By the time of his death in Ghana on August 27th, 1963, yes, on the eve of the March on Washington, Dr. Du Bois, to borrow from David Levering Lewis, was, quote, an Olympus of scholarship and opinion who cut an amazing swath through 4 continents, writing 16 pioneering or provocative books on sociology, history, politics, and race relations. Y'all could clap for that. But not without love. His 2 mothers, love. Mary and Fisk. You see, Harvard took no gamble on him, just like Vanderbilt took no chance on me. The same has been true and will be true for so many more of us who will overcome everything that life throws at us. Not because we are destined, but rather because we are determined. A determination that comes from the confidence of knowing who and whose we are. A confidence that comes from knowing that we were and that we are loved into being. Maybe Du Bois would still have been great without his 2 mothers' loves. But I wouldn't bet on it. You see, that song of my Bahamian girlhood, you remember the take on Seeger's classic? It has a stanza that goes this way. He took 100 pounds of clay, and then he said, "Hey, listen, I've got to fix this world today because I know what I've been missing." And he rolled his thick sleeves up, and then the world began. He created a woman and lots of loving for a man. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. DeGregory. Almost a year ago,
Breathe.
Dr. Kwame called me and he said, I need someone to do a forward for the book that we're working on. And there was one person that I thought of and he thought of, and he said, perfect. And he called Crystal and she agreed. And so today, I just want to thank you for being here and honoring Dr. Du Bois with us. And on behalf of Fisk University, Provost Carr, and our entire committee, I'd like to present you a collector's edition of Heritage and Honor, and this is number 7 of 100.